All right. Congratulations for investing in your family today by joining AI Parenting Live as we learn about parenting in this ever changing world of AI. We're a judgment free community moving from screen time to quality time. And our motto is don't sedate, relate to create. And today we're going to dive into the future of sedation by going deep into how federated tracking is going to forever change the internet as you know it. So, cookies are the main way that big tech companies connect your behaviors on the internet to your personal identity. It's how big tech knows what posts, videos, and ads to serve you next. So, why is big tech getting rid of cookies? I'll give you a hint. It's not because they've stopped tracking you. Today, we're going to learn how AI is hiding deeper. We're going to shed some light on new AI concepts that big tech doesn't want you to know. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, they're a leading nonprofit defending digital privacy and free speech for over, say, 30 years. They had this to say about federated tracking, that big tech will surely tout this as a step forward in transparency and user control, knowing full well that the vast majority of its users will not understand how the federated learning of cohorts, or flock, works, and that very few will go out of their way to turn it off. So, I decided that that would be a good challenge for today to explain something that is designed to be hard to understand. If you haven't seen this channel before, I'm your host, Dr. Ed, and if you're feeling anxious about screen time, I'm here to tell you that it's not your fault. No one could have predicted how AI would fundamentally change our world. And today, AI is changing so quickly that it's a struggle to keep up. And that's why AI Parenting is here live to answer your most urgent questions for today. So if you can hear us, leave a comment in the chat. Yes, can you hear me? Are you catching this? Is this sticking in? I can see. Yes. Excellent. Okay. So let me just make sure before we move on. I just want to make sure it's showing up on all the different platforms. And I appreciate anybody who is joining right now, but sometimes, just sometimes, yes, loud and clear. Okay, Edna's there. Okay, yes, thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page. I'm glad to see you again. Thank you for joining. Okay, excellent. So today is about learning AI concepts that are hard for non-techie to understand. Thank you. Edna, maybe I can bring this up on the side here. Yeah. Edna says, yes, loud and clear. Hi, Edward. It's good to be here. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, it's good to be able to share this with you as well, because I think it's a very interesting and important topic. Because really, if these are concepts that are hard for non-techies to understand, it becomes more important for you to understand it. So that's what I'm like. I'm hoping I can depend on your participation in the comments to just let me know if you're following. Is that okay? Yes? Just let me know if you're following. Yes. Cool. Thank you. So there has been a lot of news regarding changes to tracking our actions on the internet this month. Facebook bought a full-page advertisement in the New York Times about how Apple new opt-in for app tracking hurts small businesses. So maybe you've heard that already. Like this was in December. So why? Why would Apple giving you the option to opt in to app tracking be bad for small businesses? Well, we browse more than a Statue of Liberty worth of posts every single day. And these milliseconds that we spend on each post tell big tech about your unconscious desires. And soon, apps like Facebook will need you to opt in to tracking in order to send this information back to the Facebook AI. So as a small business owner, what does this mean? It means that it's harder for their ads to target specific users based on their unconscious desires. So like how much milliseconds you spend looking at posts, it's going to be harder to target ads to you specifically based on your unconscious desires. Is that sinking in? Is that making sense so far? So that's the consequence for small businesses. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not about Apple trying to better protect your privacy. Although, like, I'm sure that's what their marketing is all about. And this is not about Apple fighting the big bad Facebook from capturing your data. This is a walled garden strategy that is going to force more advertisers to move from Facebook to Apple's own mobile ad platform, rather than those of, say, Google and Facebook. This is about Apple staking claim to the mobile advertising market that they own and control. So, how is big tech reacting to this and other legal restrictions, such as Europe's Global Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR? Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where Federated Tracking comes in. And I mentioned at the beginning that this is going to change the internet as you know it. So this month, Google announced that they would not build identifiers or tools to track users across multiple websites starting next year in 2022. Great news, right? Instead, our web products will be powered by privacy-preserving technology, which prevent individual tracking while still delivering results for advertisers and publishers, said David Temkin, Google's Director of Product Management for Ads, Privacy, and Trust. Google released their alternative to cookie tracking, known as the Federated Learning of Cohorts, or FLoC, into Chrome. So if you use the Chrome browser, it's got it this month. And it's designed to enable ad targeting based on the user's general browsing interest without websites knowing their exact browsing history. So a little bit complicated. Let me explain. Google's FLoC, this is something that I found really interesting from the EFF. They said that Google's FLoC is a terrible idea, wrote the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with EFF, in a public blog post. And I just mentioned, like, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is an organization that has been protecting people's privacy and some of their rights online for over 30 years. Now, mark my words, in several years, you will yearn for the days of cookie tracking, when you at least could know what companies were tracking about you. What is happening today parallels what happened to AI in the 1990s, when people like Target Dad learn things from AI, like suggestions that they didn't even know about their own families. And you'll see how history is repeating itself. Big tech is stopping the creepiness, but not the creeping. Does that make sense so far? Everything that I'm describing today is not new. It is just a repeat of all the things that we didn't learn. Was it 30 years ago? 20, 30 years ago? The history is repeating itself here in a big way. And that's exactly why we need to be curious about these three topics to really understand flock. Because flock matters. The first is, so let's see if I can bring up the title today. So we are talking about the evolution of tracking. And so we're going to cover three different categories. The first is baking flock cookies. I know, it's kind of an interesting way of describing it. The second is data rights. And then the third is unconscious advertising. So, ready to get started? Yes? Okay, here we go. So the first one that we're going to talk about is baking flock cookies. So one way to understand federated tracking is to think about the analogy of baking cookies in 1961. Imagine this world without smartphones or the internet. So you first got a sugar cookie recipe from page 152 of the classic. You know this one, right? So this is the classic red-orange Betty Crocker cookbook. And over time, you found, you know what? It tastes better if you add mint chocolate chips and you bake it for less time in the oven. You shared your mint chocolate chip cookies at the office and everyone loved them. And they begged you for your secret recipe. I mean, since everyone had the same Betty Crocker book, you just wrote down that you followed page 152. And you added mint chocolate chips, and you baked it for 10 minutes less. You put it onto a card, and you stuck it on a bulletin board so everyone could see it, but it didn't have your name on it. And this is important. It did not have your name. It's just the recipe. So next week, Ethel brought in these pecan cookies. Oh, and they were so good. She put her modifications to page 152 on the board as well. So she talked about what she added, maybe a little bit more cinnamon, a little bit more pecan. She put it onto the board. And soon, over time, the whole board was filled with changes to page 152. Now, the manager came in and said, he looked at this board and said, wow, we should really give these recipes to Betty Crocker. So he asked Yvonne, the secretary, to summarize the board and write a letter to Betty Crocker. Yvonne put the popular cards together, and then she sent them to Betty Crocker, who put those new recipes in the 1962 edition. So the next year, she put those recipes into the new version. Now, it seems like a crazy, weird story, like baking these cookies, but this is what flock is. This is what flock is. It is a description of how flock works. It's kind of like these recipes. There's a model that's sent out, except that instead of baking cookies, the recipe is actually a model of your unconscious online behaviors. It's a way of deciding what your next post should be and what the next video you should watch, or maybe even what the next ad you'll be shown. And so here's two reasons. Well, I'll describe two reasons why this will change the internet as you know it. The first is that millions of people are contributing to the next version of the Betty Crocker cookbook of what you should see next on the internet. But the only person who gets paid is Betty Crocker. Your contributions are mandatory, and your compensation, what do you think it is? Zero. Your compensation is zero. Betty Crocker is getting filthy rich over your contributions. But technically, since your name was not on the card, you will never see a dime. Your contributions are now the legal property of Betty Crocker. Now, Betty Crocker might say, hey, this is about protecting your privacy. But in reality, the more layers that anonymize your contribution, the less claim you have to Betty Crocker's profits. And this is very important, the less rights you have to correct misinformation about your online identity. And the less rights you have to have information about you removed. You're not really going to be able to remove this information because it's legally, it's not your information. So legally, I mentioned this is not your information. So Betty Crocker can do what she wants with it. Which leads me to the second and next point. But before I move on, is this making sense so far? So Edna says, yes, please break it down for us. We need to understand this AI. Yes, I agree. We totally do. So thank you for your contribution. So the next point is this. We're going to talk a little bit about data rights. Like I mentioned, Flock, what they're doing, which is basically showing modifications to the recipe rather than your personal information, changes the nature of data rights. So the second point is that the second point is that there are different kinds of companies, or cohorts, as they call it. So it's a federated learning of cohorts. So like think of cohorts like the companies in the Betty Crocker example. Some are mom and pop shops in a poor Black neighborhood. And then others are the Ritz-Carlton. This is not new. What you get shown online already depends on your race, gender, and income. I mean, using AI to predict your socioeconomic status, again, also is not new. In 2013, Facebook was granted a patent for inferring household income for users of a social networking system based on the sites that you visit and the place where you live. So, like, there's already a patent on this exact issue. Like, granted a patent. I'm not talking about when they were applying for a patent. In 2013, they were granted the patent for this. Also, like, this automatic opting you in to send your data to big tech is also not new as well. For example, in 2018, Google started automatically opting you into Chrome browser logging when you logged into any Google product, such as Gmail. So I don't know if you know that, but like if you're on Google Chrome, you just log into Gmail, the information is being sent to Google, right? It's frightening. Yes. In 2013, Gizmodo's Kashmir Hill wrote about how shadow profiles. Now, you've heard this in the news a little bit about shadow profiles. Um, these are people who never created a Facebook account. They were discovered when a user downloaded their Facebook file, and it included not just their friends' visible contact information, but also their friends' shadow contact information. So the extent of the connections Facebook builds around its users is supposed to be visible really only for the company itself. But in this case, a bug revealed a truth. Your information is being stored on Facebook even if you don't have a Facebook account. In the same article, you heard horrifying stories, such as a man who years ago donated sperm to a couple secretly, so they could have a child, only to have Facebook recommend the child as a person he should know. They didn't like that person. He still knows the couple, but he's not friends with them on Facebook. But somehow he knows that, yep, your child, this child, because you create their profile, right? Like, so it knows that. Again, unconscious input. It kind of doesn't matter whether or not you friended a person. It knows. A social worker whose client called her by her nickname on the second visit because she'd known, but because she's shown up in his people you may know profile. So people you may know. So if you go like to your friends list and it'll suggest people you know. Despite not having exchanged any contact information, you suddenly find that this person that you just called you by a nickname, suddenly they appear in this people you may know profile. A woman whose father left her family when she was 6 years old, like this is somebody like you wouldn't even know, saw his then mistress suggested to her as a Facebook friend 40 years later. So like a father you hadn't seen for 40 years, you see her mistress on your Facebook profile. Like this is AI like revealing its creepiness. And like I said, reactions to creepiness are why things get changed. An attorney who wrote, I deleted Facebook after it recommended as people you may know, a man who was defense counsel on one of my cases. We had only communicated through my work email, which is not connected to my Facebook, which convinced me that Facebook was scanning my work email. So a person that you've never connected with on Facebook suddenly appears as, hey, people you may know. And so what's going on here? Well, it turns out like Facebook doesn't even need to know, like scan your email, your work email in order to get that kind of information. Like I mentioned, like these kind of unconscious things are there. And also it's not about you, it's about like other people who are like you. And finding people you may know is based on maybe your friends' profiles, for example. So Facebook also asks business owners to install a Facebook pixel. So I don't know if you've heard of a Facebook, like it's a cookie tracker on many popular sites you visit, so that your actions can be logged. So many of you have already heard of cookies. Many modern browsers, such as like Brave, for example, they block both trackers and ads. And since blogs and news sites and so many media creators make their revenue from these ads, they require that you unblock ads in order to watch the articles or news or videos, etc. So all this is, I'm not talking about anything new here. Like this has been around for years, almost, was it 10 years? So what is new is that you no longer know what cohort you're in and how many people are in your cohort. And why does this matter? Who cares? Right? So I'm in a federated learning of cohorts. Who cares? Well, if the cohort is small, right? So cohort is like, think of the companies I talked about in the Betty Crocker example. If it's small, let's say 10 people or 100 people, then it essentially becomes a fingerprint that eventually leads back to you. It's not that hard to figure out, like, among these 10 people, which one is you. If the cohort is really big, let's say it's like millions of people, then it becomes a way of grouping people by broad categories. It could be like gender or race or income, those types of like much more broad categories. Essentially, we are teaching AI to be biased. Yeah, pretty much to be biased. We're teaching it discrimination. Oh, Nicole, who is joining us on Periscope, asks, so which browser do you use to avoid this? Ah, I am so glad you asked, Nicole. This is a wonderful question. I am going to share a little bit of an article with you. I use Brave as the web browser myself. So Brave is based on the Google engine, but some of the things that it does related to tracking, it actually removes. So for example, with the Brave browser, when you log into a Google site, it actually doesn't send that information. It doesn't log you in and log your browsing information to Google. So I use it because I used to use it just because it was faster. I was like, oh, I don't know why. My computer's really slow. And then for some reason, it's just faster with Brave. So other teachers recommended it to me. And then I've since learned actually that this browser actually does reduce a lot of the information that is sent over. They've done some analysis. Actually, this month, it was like March 18th, they did an analysis of several different web browsers, including Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and I think a few others. Oh, I think Safari as well. And they found, like, of all the different ones that send information out, of course, like, they're going to be biased because they're looking at this, but they did find that there's a lot less information, even if you just like compare Chrome to, say, Firefox. Like, Firefox for some reason is sending a lot more data than Chrome is, and then Brave is sending even less data than Chrome. So I hope that helps answer your question, Nicole. But thank you for asking it. So we're an international community, right? So we've got like people from Periscope, from Facebook, who are participating as well. So I appreciate your contribution. All right, so let's move on. Now, what's the big deal about grouping people by these broad categories, such as gender, race, and income? Now, we know in the 2018 US election, we saw how misinformation targeted to poor Black communities had an impact in growing voter apathy. They just wouldn't go to the polls. The mostly non-Black media didn't notice these advertisements because they were served a very different set of advertisements on sites such as Facebook. So if the argument is made that big tech doesn't actually know what cohort you're placed in, they can also avoid liability for making suggestions that are potentially harmful to you. So let's say Betty Crocker releases a recipe that causes a medical reaction in a nut-free cookie company. Betty Crocker might argue that she is not liable because she never came up with the recipe to begin with. She only shared a recipe that an anonymous user came up with. And when asked who that user was, Betty Crocker could then say, there's no way to know who submitted it, since they were all anonymous to begin with. Remember, like we said, the cards are anonymous. This is how federated learning works. is we're only talking about the modifications to the model, modifications to the recipe, and we're only looking at, like, there's no name associated with it. It's just like a few modifications. So this anonymity is being described as protecting your privacy, but really what it does is it gives protection to these large, big tech companies. It is going to be really hard to know what posts and videos and ultimately ads are shown to whom. It's also going to be really hard to know where the suggestions come from and who did they go to or who they went to. And this matters to you because you won't have the option to turn this off. You will not have the right to correct, delete, or change this data because it's technically and legally not yours. Your data is just this anonymous modification to a recipe. Is that making sense so far? This is an important concept. Your data, especially when you are in a flock example, it's just those cards. It's just those cards, those modifications to the recipe. And legally and technically, they do not belong to you. They are the property of the big tech company that is implementing Flock. And so it has all sorts of details about you, all sorts of details about what you like to watch, how much milliseconds you spend on certain posts. But it's technically not you. It's technically a processed version of you. It's just recipe, modifications to a recipe. What's the big deal, right? That's what we're sending over to Google in Flock. So this changes the nature. And we used to say that data is the new oil. Well, federated data is going to be the new oil, because that data that people were collecting about you, the personally identifiable data, was a liability. Think about it, right? Like every little bit of data you have to be liable for. You could get sued if you don't handle it properly. Ugh, so annoying, right? So much work. But now, if I collect this federated data, yes, the more of that I have, this is an asset for that company, and it doesn't go away. Like I have this information potentially forever, and your rights to that, to delete it, are basically none, because it's not you. It's an anonymous version of you, right? That is why I say you are going to yearn for the day that you at least knew you had cookies, and you at least knew what they were tracking about you. At least you could say, like, oh, I don't want cookie tracking. You are going to yearn for that day. And that day is going to disappear very, very soon. And we're going to enter this new era of data. And I'm not talking about regular, like personally identifiable data. We're going to enter this new era of federated data, which you have no rights to, and you have no control of. And technically, it's not you. Does that make sense? Yes. It's an important concept. Which leads me into my last key point. And that's this. Let's see if I can bring it up. I call it unconscious advertising. So unconscious advertising, what is that? So let me describe it here. So digital marketers and media buyers have known for years that training an AI on a list of people who have bought from you in the past is far more effective than boosting a post based on characteristics from your profile, such as like gender and age alone. And the reason is that people just don't want all this information on their profiles, on their personal. They don't want all their personal information like on social media. So they cleverly leave many of the personal identity fields blank, believing that they have done their part to protect their privacy. However, we know that unconscious input, like the milliseconds of watch time, they reveal the truth. For example, maybe you didn't write down your hobbies into your Facebook profile. But if your watch time like matches those of others that love fishing, for example, it's pretty clear that fishing is your hobby as well. Even if you've never liked, commented, or shared any fishing posts, or you never joined any fishing groups, your unconscious watch time, like as you scroll, that Statue of Liberty of posts every single day, reveals the truth. It's very hard to hide from it. You'd have to not be on the internet at all. So you think like, oh, it's only what I put into the... No, it's not what you put into the profile. What you put into the profile doesn't matter anymore. Now, this has been going on for years. So, like I mentioned, they already target you based on very specific things like your age, your gender, and your income level. So how is Flock different from what has happened before? Well, like the title, I said, let me bring it up again. The future of digital marketing and advertising is unconscious. Rather than boosting particular posts, it will be about identifying just a few of your ideal prospects on the platform, and then getting an AI to find people with similar online behaviors. So the input to the system will no longer be explicit personal characteristics like your age, your gender, your hobbies. No, it doesn't need to be those anymore. I'll tell you a little story. Is it okay if I tell you a little story? So I remember when I first put in my birthday info into Facebook, then at the time, you had an option to not include my year of birth. So I explicitly said, okay, no, I'm not going to put my year of birth into my Facebook profile. I thought this was great because there's like this way I can protect this information on Facebook. And years later, I was shocked to learn that my birth year was on my profile, even though I had never put it in myself. At the time, I thought, oh, Facebook, maybe they got it from another site. Like they went to some other site where I had put it in and they had learned it from there. But I've since learned that that's not even necessary. AI can determine my age based on my friends and my online behavior pretty quick. It doesn't need me to put in an age in order for me. Like, just because you don't put in data doesn't mean we don't know it about you. Does that make sense? So it's like your unconscious data, like how much time I spend looking at, people of my age's posts, like pretty quickly reveals like which category I'm in. As a result, advertisers, like digital and marketing advertisers, they will be better at discriminatory ad targeting by creating cohorts of people with those exact characteristics and asking AI to create lookalike audiences. For example, if I want people of a certain income level, well, all I have to do is put people that I know that have that income level into a lookalike audience and then ask the AI to find others that have the same browsing behavior. Even if you don't write down how much income you have, it doesn't matter, right? Like you behave like other people that have that income, especially online. So this is important because even if people don't put anything in their profile, it still should be able to find people who match that profile exactly. So what do ads look like in a world of Flock or the federated learning, or I call it federated targeting because that's more an apt description. Ads in a world of Flock they'll be more targeted, they'll be more discriminatory, and most importantly, they're going to be more effective. It will be like they are speaking specifically to you or people in your exact situation. Maybe you've seen this already. Like maybe you've seen ads that are just like, oh, we were talking about this thing, and then suddenly it appeared. Like I already showed you many examples of this. And so I'm hoping I hope this is sinking in so far. Is it sinking in? Like this is exactly where things are headed. And this data, like this is why all this creepiness is happening, is because like it is aware of things and it knows your behaviors, and your behaviors are what matters. What you write in your profile, let's be honest, your personally identifiable information isn't very useful to begin with. People lie on their profiles. They have incomplete profiles. Big deal, right? Like, that we don't need that information in order to really know who you are. And so this is exactly why I think this is a very interesting topic that we need to discuss. And I hope, I've structured it around the Betty Crocker example because I hope that it's easier for you to understand. And it's like, whoa, wow. Thank you, Edna. Appreciate that. Just at the end here, it's like, whoa, wow. Yes. Yeah, it's scary. It's scary. So what can you do about it? What can you do about this? I mean, that's why we're here, right? And that is why I'm here to answer your questions. Thank you, Nicole, for your question. This is exactly why I'm doing AI parenting, is because this stuff's changing all the time. Like every week I read stuff and I'm like, how is everybody not aware of this? How are they not super concerned? Like, why is it just like us in the tech world and a few people from the EFF going like raising red flags? Like, we're the only people who even talk about this stuff. And the reason for that is, well, if you worked for one of these tech companies, it'd be like biting the hand that feeds you, right? Like we can't share this with people. And so, yeah, this is risky and it has consequences. And so that's why this is also the reason why I think it's important for you to be aware and for us to bring it up. So what can you do? The first thing that I would suggest is I hope that they will continue to require it or make it as optional. But if Flock is an option, right? So if they said like, oh, like turn off federated learning of cohorts, hopefully as it begins, that will be an option. You will have an option to turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off as soon as you are aware that it's there. At this point, like my recommendation is just avoid the Chrome browser right now. Based on what I can see so far, I'm really concerned about the fact that this is baked in to the latest version of Chrome. So like if you're a Chrome user, you get updates automatically. This is not an option. You don't get like oh, okay, I don't want this kind of stuff, like turn it off. This is not determined by you. This is part of the program. And I don't know if this game is going to last forever. And I don't know if like Flock, like the federated learning of cohorts, is going to be adopted by everyone, like all the big tech companies. But to me, it makes a lot of sense because it addresses all of the GDPR concerns. Like, why wouldn't you do this, right? Like, it just seems like you'd be leaving money on the table if you didn't do this. Um, and so be very aware of federated tracking or federated anything. What it means is just a new world of your data and it means you have less rights to your data. And it also means that really, like, you're still going to get targeted ads. Things aren't going to change. I've mentioned this several times, but I think it's important to reiterate. Like, the whole premise behind what we do here in AI parenting is to mention that AI acts much less like an intelligence and much more like the automatic decisions of your unconscious mind. And your inputs into these systems, such as like, like the feeds that you watch, the search results that you look at, they matter less on things like explicit clicks, and now they just matter a lot more on just like browsing, right? Because the nice thing about a small screen is that you kind of have to scroll in order to see the next post, in order to see more content. And so like that scrolling behavior gives us a lot of information about what you like and what you don't like, and you don't control this. You kind of like go through it automatically. You don't think like, oh, I watched some posts for 3 seconds instead of the typical 1.4 seconds for the average post. But AI notices and it's watching, and that's a strong way of connecting you to everyone else who has similar behaviors. So even if you don't put anything on your profile, like, it's not hard to know, for AI to know like what people you're like, and what other people who have similar interests, like they have data that they wrote specifically. You're kind of like those people, and so we're entering this new AI world of marketing and advertising, which is really going to change the nature of what it's like to browse on the internet. The other thing that I'm going to suggest, and this is a plug on purpose, I talked a little bit about AI parenting Insider, which is my email lists last week. And so my goal is to share with the insiders exclusive information that expands on topics that I discuss each week. So for example, like this week was really all about ethical AI, and I included some new reactions from my computer science peers. What did they think about it? So all you need to do is leave a comment below. If you found today's session helpful, like to say yes or something. And if you sign up for AI Parenting Insider this week, I'll provide you with a code for a free screen time chart that makes it easier to see the quality of the screen time that your family is spending today. And don't worry, Edna, I got you. You're gonna get one of those as well. So thank you for signing up last week. So I think that's let me hide. That's the main message I had for this week. Let me know, is there any questions, like anything that you're really curious about after this? I want to know, did this make sense? Did today's session, was it sinking in? Did it make sense about what this is? Why this is important? Let me know, because I don't know if it's designed as a concept to be tricky to understand for non-tech people, on purpose, right? Like I talked about AI. The moment people start noticing, that's a problem, and then that's when it has to go deeper into your unconscious, less visible to you, more complicated algorithms or more complicated language, like federated learning of cohorts. What is that? It's it has to go that way because we generally, like, public reaction to these kind of things is one of, I don't know, like, horror, right? Like, yeah, if you really knew what was going on, and that's what this channel is about, and that's why I have AI parenting. I don't know if I can do this like forever. What we're doing here, these live streams. I hope these sessions are helpful for you, but I need your feedback. All right, like if it makes sense, let me know. If it doesn't make sense to you and there's still questions, I'm here to answer them because it seems like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. That's what Edna said. Like, wow. It's like, mm-hmm. Yeah, wow is like how I would describe it as well. Like maybe you weren't expecting this, you had no idea. Um, in our field, like I think federated learning of cohorts has been something that's been around for maybe a couple years now. I think it's Google in 2019 described what the federated learning of cohorts was. They described this concept, but the research on this field has been around for ages, because privacy regulations have been like around for ages, and it's this constant cat and mouse game between policymakers and tech moves fast, right? They are not waiting, for the next policy regulation. They're like 5 steps ahead of you, or ahead of where policy is. It's like, oh, we don't like cookies, and we're gonna get rid of cookies. It's like we don't even care about cookies anymore. It's like we're already doing something different. You guys are still thinking about cookies. Like, who cares? Oh, wow. Okay. There you go. There you go. I appreciate that. So Edna says, yes, very helpful. What an eye opener. Now changing the browser to Brave. Congratulations. Congratulations. Yeah, I don't get sponsored or anything by them, but I am concerned about privacy, and so that's exactly why I'm sharing this information with you. I think it's important. I think that's it for me today. I think that I know that some of this stuff takes a little bit of time to sink in, and you might be thinking of other questions. You might have other things that you would like me to address or to answer. My goal with this is that this is a conversation. Like, we need to have dialogue about this topic. Otherwise, nothing is going to get done. You will still not really truly understand what's going on, and this is still going to be, it's still going to happen. Like, whether or not you learn about it, these kinds of things are happening. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You can be rest assured that we're not going, like, the industry, big tech is not going to let some rules and regulations that are coming down to prevent them from running and operating their businesses. There is a huge investment, and normally I don't just talk about like small little, like this is like a tech oddity. I usually try to cover only the big, like billion-dollar industries that are really changing the face of tech and is getting to the scale where they will impact parents in a big way. And that's one of the reasons why we have, with AI parenting, this focus on AI technologies tracking, because I think it's interesting from the perspective of any parent, like that you understand, why do you have so much anxiety? Like, what's the difference between screen time when we were a kid just watching TV? I mean, they knew how many people watched it versus today. It's like, yeah, they're doing the same type of tracking, right? No, it's different. It's different. It's different than what you watched as a kid, watching TV as a kid. They knew a lot less about your profile. Remember, you watched TV with your other siblings. Maybe you watched it in a family room with your parents. Like, most of what's happening online these days is all private, right? It's all like people with their cell phones or their tablets in their own bedroom. So these are very important things for you to be aware of, and it changes the nature of like what browsing on the internet what ads you're going to be shown. And I think this space is just fascinating, right? Like there's big money involved, and as a result, like there's going to be like huge advancements in this field in a very, like, it's crazy. Like they talk about it one year, and the next year it's like, okay, we're getting rid of cookies altogether. We are protecting your privacy. You are all set. And instead, we're going to be doing stuff that's better for everyone. It's going to be better for you because it's going to be less of your personal data that's going to be tracked. And then it's going to be better for advertisers because they're going to be able to target you better. And I think that's the marketing messaging. And I think that it is our duty and our job as parents, as educators, as just digital citizens to ask the question, is it? Is it really? Is it really better for us? Like, what are the consequences? I want you to think about the horror stories. I want you to think about what would the Black Mirror episode of this reality be like if it were to play out? What would be the long-term consequences of all of this data being collected about you that you had no control over? What would happen if that happened? Like if this became the reality? And my feeling is, if you are not aware of the issues, you can't even really say to anybody like, hey, this is bad. We gotta like not be doing this. Because you're the advocates. You are the ones who are going to be speaking to others. You are the ones who are going to be influencing others. And if you want to, like, if this is important to you, right, like, make sure that you're part of this movement, this community. That's what this is all about. Is we are a community supporting each other. Yes, we're judgment free because we know we're all in the same boat. Nobody could have taught you about this. Like federated learning, like this is stuff that I had to learn just recently, right? Like, and using my experience, like my background in computer science, I can kind of understand, oh, these are ways that I would use it. These are ways that make sense to me from a computer science perspective. I wonder if other people are seeing it the same way. Now, I don't know. Like, I can't say that what I am predicting is exactly what's going to come true, but you can see it. You can see what this, like, can you see what this does? And I hope that it's described in a way that's easy to understand. Because that's what the purpose of this is. All right. I want to thank you for attending. I will see you next week, where we're going to talk about the skills that your children, your students, or even your family, they can develop that will not be replaced by AI. So these are the 21st century skills that I think everyone needs to know. I want to go back a little bit more into like creation and relation, because I think that we need to start talking about skills. We need to start talking about the light at the end of this tunnel. And I think there is. It boils a lot to what I talk about, the creativity aspect. So I say, don't sedate, relate to create. I think if you really dive deep into the creation side, there are many different dimensions for creation. And if we start understanding what are those dimensions that people do really well and that computers will always struggle with, then we will have a much better sense of what skills to invest in and what skills that we need to develop in order to kind of future-proof yourself against the coming AI and automation wave. Thank you again. I do appreciate you, and I really appreciate your feedback and your comments. It keeps me going. It keeps me going with this work. I've been doing this for a few months now, and I'm still not sure. It's like, oh, is this the right thing to do? Am I delivering something that's of value to all of you? And that's why your feedback has been very, very helpful for me. And yeah, it's important to me, like, because I feel like, to me, it's important to my family. And I feel like anybody like who's in the same boat, anybody who's teaching kids, it's going to be important to them as well. Thank you. We will see you next week.